to recap, we're talking about Podman v3, Docker Compose capabilities within it, and
and basically what happens is really, and this is the part that took me a bit to wrap my head around, is you're actually using Docker Compose, but because Docker Compose was originally developed by a third party, who, of course, I can't remember the person's name off the top of my head, but they were developed independently of Docker. And so what it does is actually calls the public API, which happens to be a RESTful API, to do all its stuff, right? So what Podman v3 does is it actually replicates that RESTful API kind of in general, but then also makes it available in the same way that Docker does. So now Docker Compose, when it calls that RESTful API, gets Podman. And so internally, they might do some different things, but the bulk of it is that's kind of what's going on. So here's just the show notes or proposed show notes for this week. For anybody who is curious, and I know we've been asked before, this is all on GitHub right now. Everything that we're going to talk about today, or in theory, everything we're going to talk about.
Theory, yeah.
And I will put the link.
I got it.
In. Oh, I got it.
Okay. There you go.
And so if you want to follow along, it's right there. Okay, so one of the things I actually wanted to do when I started writing blog posts a million years ago is be cool if we had like some sort of like centralized repository, because a lot of blog posts are about like, how do I install blah, and then how do I use blah. And I always thought it'd be kind of cool if like attached to the article was an Ansible playbook that you could just run, right? Like, it's good to kind of do it by hand, once or twice, but it's also nice to have something that is repeatable that you can use elsewhere or whatever. So I took that article and I turned it into a playbook. The playbook is pretty straightforward, and apparently vscode really doesn't like that I have kubectl actually trapped in a container, and one of these days I need to give it a symlinks, or like a link so that it can actually run kubectl and be happy about it. But I don't use that feature set very much, so I haven't gotten around to it. All right, so the first thing we do is we install Podman. Now, we only have to install Podman. I almost always install Scopio and Builda separately. You may actually I think you might get Builda by dependency.
I think you get Builda by dependency, but not
Scopio.
Not Scopio.
Yeah.
And so what is Scopio for the audience's education?
So Scopio is I don't play with it that much. I mostly just use it for search.
Yes.
So it's like container search. I think it does other stuff too.
It does a lot of other stuff.
Well, so hey, look, we can. Oh wait, let me
find the homepage real quick for everybody. But basically, you can work with remote image registries, like Langdon said. You can sign content. You can retrieve the images with it. You can kind of like. Scopio is kind of that thing you put in your pipeline for moving images around or pulling them down or getting them in the place you need them to be, as well as a tool for you to search from your command line, like, out of all my container registries that I have open here,
right,
which one is going to have the latest version of kubectl in your case, right? Like,
exactly.
You can search like that. So there's a Scopio. I just dropped it in chat, folks. The Scopio GitHub page, and I thought we had like a nice fancy page for it, but I guess we don't. So
yeah, I thought we did too. Do we not?
I thought no, apparently not. Well, at least it's not linked in the GitHub repo or in the README. So
let's let me see if my Google foo is better than yours.
Yeah. So but the biggest thing, right? Like, I'm looking at the same page that I just shared in chat. There's a handful of commands that it does, right? Like, you can log in, log out, you can grab a manifest, digest. You can standalone sign, standalone verify, sync your local repo with a remote repo. You can
I didn't know you could do that. That's kind of
cool. Yeah. Synchronize images between container registries and local directories. That's the full description on that one. And then obviously copy, delete, inspect, list tags.
Yeah, I think the two biggest things that that are hard to find anywhere else, one of them is the list tags, which is super useful for quote unquote like properly designed containers, where the container has a bunch of different versions available, but they're all based on tags. And like it's really weird. Like even from the get-go, Docker never really treated the remote tags almost like a first class citizen. Like they're super useful and they're a super good way of like kind of getting different kind of profiles for any given container, but they're really hard to discover. So that's one of the big reasons I use Scopio is I want to go and find out, like, if the Fedora that's there, like what versions of Fedora are available, right? Which might be listed as tags, or commonly would be listed as tags. And then the other big one is that inspect, which kind of tells you the intricate details of a remote container, so you don't have to kind of pull it down to dig around in it. And I know Scopio is used a bunch to do the kind of the security components of like the health index and stuff like that, so that you can kind of do all that stuff remotely, so you don't have to have a copy of every single container in the entire world on your local, or every single image, I guess, on your local host. All right, so that was a little digression into Scopio.
Okay, so 2 questions now.
Okay.
Well, a comment and a question. Oh my God, this tag listing is amazing.
Yes,
and then
yes, right?
Can't you just Podman search, or does it get finer details in that? And what I'm thinking is Podman search is a little scoped where Scopio is not, if that makes sense.
I actually think Podman search
would use Scopio?
Uses Scopio underneath. Yeah. So I think they're pretty close to the same, but I don't know of a way in Podman to get some of the other details. And sometimes I don't know why, but I like my fingers will go towards Scopio to do that stuff.
Right. I think it's because you and I have been exposed to Scopio very early on in our
right,
in its existence. For example.
Right.
Yeah.
So check it out. Definitely bring back comments. Let us know if you think we should like dedicate a more detailed episode to it.
Absolutely.
But
yeah,
we've covered it largely already.
Yeah.
The list tags thing, as Playing Risky says, is super useful. At least in my when you're doing that discovery process of somebody else's image, it's a hard thing to get elsewise. And like I said, it's one of those things I do not understand why it's not like, we refer to them as like a first class citizen. It's like, images are listed, containers are listed, but the tags are like hard and kind of clunky and stuff like that. And like I said, I just don't understand really why. So, all right. So moving on. Okay. So I have my awesome tasks here. So the next thing we do, and the only reason I separate these was for the sake of discussion here. I obviously could put these 2 packages in with Podman, but what I wanted to
whatever you're sharing, it's very tiny.
Oh, is it?
Sorry.
I thought this was my normal big size.
It was big, but you moved it around and now it's not.
Oh, right. Okay. Actually, it's probably because I could share. Let me go back to sharing single windows. I think it might be better.
Yeah, that might work better out for you. But I should point out that you can download Scopio on just about every OS out there, and like use it effectively, right? So like you can install it with Brew on Mac OS, or compile it from source if you want on Linux. So it's does it work on Windows? Let's see. No, but it does work on your Raspberry Pi, so you got that going for you.
If it doesn't, it should. Narendra, let me know about the size now. I hopefully it's better. So I think it's a Go application, which
it is a Go application. Yeah.
Yeah. So it should.
You should be able in theory to get it to work.
Yeah, and I know the team wants it to work. Wants all of those tools to work on basically any OS. So if it's not there yet, it should land soon, right? If you're running BOS or OS Warp, maybe not so much. But
two.
Well, I want to talk to what's John Oliver call it? Our
Void.
The show daddy.
What's that? Yeah. Show granddaddy or whatever it is.
Yeah. So IBM, of course, being OS2 Warp. So Narendra still would like it bigger. Let's see if we can figure out how do we do. I think it's here. I need to go play with this one of these days, but I haven't had great luck with it yet. But I found some tool that supposedly will make this better. Okay, that's up to 18. Hopefully that's a little more readable. And like I said, if you're
don't
having
worry
trouble
about the
reading
stuff
it,
on the left-hand side.
yeah,
right. Like don't worry about your extensions and
so
everything. Yeah.
if you're having any trouble reading it, like I said, it is in the repo, so you can go and open it and make it any size you want. So okay, going back to so this next Ansible task is really just separated because this is specifically what you need if you have Podman to make Docker Compose work. So you need the Podman Docker package, which basically, actually, I'm really curious now. I think it's basically, oh shoot, I forgot. I can't. Oh, you know what? I can do a terminal in here.
Yeah.
Although I bet this font's going to be tiny, tiny. But I just wanted to do
terrible.
All right, cool.
I don't know if you can increase it, but
yeah. Oh, wait, I need an IP address.
Oh, you gotta log into something.
See, the problem with getting really into containers is that you never ever install anything locally. So
Control to increase text size in vscode, Langdon. Oh, there you go.
But that doesn't
change the font size, but it does increase the interfaces
right.
font. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So IBM or RPM, IBM, nice Freudian slip. So I think this basically just installs some symlinks. I can't talk. Well, these are, that's a lot of docs. Let's get rid of man. Yeah, so it basically just installs this symlink. Because if you look here, I think it's a symlink.
Should be.
No, it's an actual pointer. I was wondering about that.
Okay.
Because yeah, I think it's it might get angry if it's a symlink, like so it might actually be its own binary copy.
It could be a binary that kind of throws a symlink.
Yeah, I think it must be, right? Because I mean, if you just look at the size difference,
the socket kind of thing, yeah.
That's 167, and this one's no, that's
a lot.
Am I reading that right? Yeah, like 4 megs, right? I really should use this all the time because I'm not 48 megs, because I'm not that bright. I can't do the math in my head.
No, you're illustrious.
It's actually it's the commas. It's the lack of commas.
The lack of commas will get you every time. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're European, it's the lack of periods, right? Or if you're Indian, right, it's the you have commas every 2 characters, but it's just that there's no separator. I have a very hard time reading the number.
You kind of have to read from right to left on those. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So long story short, okay, so I just was kind of curious. So basically what Podman Docker does is, I'm not exactly sure how it works. This may be a question for Brent one of these days. It essentially installs a symlink to Podman, but now anytime I'm on this computer, I can type Docker and get Podman. So yeah, see, it even says Emily CLI. Oh, maybe it's an actual pass through. That's how it works. Excuse me, instead of a like a straight up symlink.
Oh, Plain Risky says that Ubuntu is now shipping Podman, Builda, and Scopio in 21.04. Interesting. Okay, good to know.
Which do you happen to know which repo? Is it one of the close repos, or is it like the everything?
I think it's like he installed it on its Pi and it's there. So yeah, super curious. Like you just did a regular Raspbian install and off you went.
Nice, awesome.
Oh, he says it came in 20.10.
Okay.
Cool. Huh. Interesting. All right. We had someone from Ubuntu on the other day that was super interested in how we do things. But anyway,
I saw an interesting thing on I think it was on Reddit somewhere, but it was like somebody had received a cease and desist from Xfinity about doing essentially illegal downloads.
Oh,
file they told them that they had illegally downloaded that they owned the copyright for, or sorry,
someone else
it was a DMCA report, so they don't tell you who it actually is from, but it comes through like your ISP,
right?
And whoever that was claimed that they had copyright ownership on the file that they had downloaded. That file happened to be the Ubuntu 2010 ISO.
ISOs.
Yeah.
Give me a
So I'm
break.
pretty sure it wasn't canonical.
It's
saying-
probably the file size match.
right.
It matches to something else that has a copyright. Yeah, I bet
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
That whole world.
I do
Those
like
dang
Lax.
torrents.
To Narendiv. Lack is like I love the word, and I love that there's a number, like a name for 100,000 that's simple. So okay, so you install Docker Compose, and just by way of explanation, to the best of my knowledge, everything about this Docker Compose package is exactly the same as the one you would get, without Podman in a sense. So it's just regular old Docker Compose. The only thing is that and I'm not sure where the dropout point is exactly. Like, I don't know if the feature set is not in Docker Compose. It's this package that is available on Fedora, but I think it's available there. But Podman doesn't support the Swarm feature set that got subsumed into Docker Compose a few years ago now. So if you're trying to do anything with the Swarm feature set, that's not going to work on Podman. So just kind of know that going in. But I think the Docker Compose has it, so you can shoot yourself in the foot with it, but it won't work when you try to run it. All right, that was long and involved. All right, so the next thing we do is we tell systemd to now enable the Podman socket. And by way of a little explanation, I can just show you. Let's see, where is it? And it just, I think I need sudo. And if you notice, so there's a socket here. And if you know anything about Linux, everything on Linux is a file. So even though this is an internet socket, right, it is just a file. So it just gets created on disk. And in the case of many sockets these days, it is managed by systemd. So you can status podman. Actually, why don't we just do star here? I want to make this a little taller because I think it's going to be a little long. And so, yeah, so you see this Podman socket is here. It's active. And, obviously I ran this playbook earlier to enable it. But we'll run it at the end just to prove that it works because it should be idempotent. And then the last thing, which I had never done in Ansible before, is you can actually do like an actual, so this will actually execute as a curl command to make sure that, and actually, sorry, before I move to that, the thing that doing that Podman Docker and the Docker Compose installed, it enables this Docker sock as well. So now we have both sockets, but if you notice, they're actually in two different places. Right. I'm not sure why. I don't know if one is right and one is wrong or whatever, but if you notice, that really is a symlink.
The Docker is the symlink, yeah.
to the Podman socket. So whatever. So, but yes, in a Ansible playbook, you can actually do a curl command. So I actually do a curl command to this URL. And let me see. Oh, actually, if we look at the blog post, I'm only sharing the one window. I forgot. Yes. Let's see. Can I get a browser window in vscode? Probably somehow. Maybe I need an extension though.
Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I think you need an extension. So I'll just copy it from the other window. But in that article that I've already linked to and is in the show notes, there is the command that they propose you run, which I'm just going to cut and paste so I don't get my extended curl incorrect. But let me just see if I can find it real quick. Where'd it go? Oh, here it is. So as you can see, it is slightly long, but basically I'm doing very obvious stuff here, right? So I'm setting the content type to be JSON. I'm using this Unix socket to do the curl request, and then I'm going to this URL. And if you notice over here, very small. There's an OK, which is a 200 return code from HTTP. So I look for that status code, then I check to make sure I got it, and then I'm actually going to retry it in case it doesn't happen. I had to like break this to get it to even get past like one retry. Like I had to actually make an error to get it to try it again, because it's just it's super quick. So yeah, all right, long-windedness. Let's see. So E35. And then just because I can never remember how to run a playbook, I almost always put a shell script around it, or I use the same shell script
over and over.
That. I know. It's more, it's so that I can run it from wherever. So like if I'm in some random directory,
that's fair.
It redoes the directory. And then I also, like I said, I forget which of these flags I need when I just want to run it locally. I don't have like a proper,
all you have to do is set the host to localhost.
Yeah, but there's what do you call it? Like I don't want to do a proper inventory. I just force it, just run, right?
Like it'll do localhost by default, I think, without an inventory.
Yeah, there was, I don't know. I started doing it a long time ago, but
yeah. Anyways,
all right. So we are
at some point. Who knows?
Yeah. So let's run it. So I'm going to give it the become password, and if you notice, everything is pretty much all of this is running as sudo or as root, because it's like installs and all that jazz. It doesn't like that I'm using Python 3, or does like I'm using Python 3. I can't figure out this message.
Don't worry about it.
All right. So obviously, I've ran this before. I know that it works. So unsurprisingly, it comes back with an OK. So this should get you to having kind of all the setup for thus far. Now, what we could do, and actually, why don't we do it this way? So I am going to, okay, so what I did was kind of, again, following along with the blog post, I went and grabbed, so there's a set of compose examples, of which there are like 20, called a GitHub repo called Awesome Compose. And in here, what I did was I just stripped out a bunch that I didn't think we were going to talk about, and I didn't think it was worth like kind of storing for the sake of storing. But in here, you can see where I got it from. It's this URL, this Awesome Compose. So nice. That's the real source. I just have them here. Didn't feel like doing submodules in Git, so I just cloned them over here. It is CC0, or CC0, so it was fine. But I wanted to make sure there was a callback to anybody who actually came across this and wanted to find the real source.
Nice.
So it has obviously a bunch of different examples. So we'll talk about the first one first, and we can do this. So here is where I started to run into a little bit of a problem, and I will explain why once you see the problem. Okay, so the first thing is, as I mentioned before, when you're doing this stuff with Docker, you need to run it as a root. Mostly, if you notice, oops, I didn't mean to do that, but if you notice, it's because that socket is actually owned by root. And so if you're trying to use that socket, you have to be root plus, but Docker expects root. So that's something to just kind of keep in mind. But so the way you run a Docker compose is use sudo Docker compose, and then you just say up. And the reason I can get away with just saying up is because we have a good naming convention for the YAML file, which is just docker-compose. And so it's going to find it automatically. You can pass it as like a -f, but we're not going to in this case, because that way it will be simpler to follow along. But we're going to run into a problem. Okay, so The problem here is my typical problem, which is that everything is bound mounted from like all over the internet, basically. So this is an SSHFS bind mount of this episodes directory into this machine. So something about the security of it, it doesn't like this. There seems to be an allow root flag I can use for SSHFS, but I thought the solutions I'm going to show you were better in this case. So the first and foremost solution I can do is just take that and copy it directly into my home dir. And so I'm going to jump over there. And here's my Docker Compose. And so if I run this here, it should just work. And there it goes. And if you haven't used Docker Compose before, both good thing, but sometimes confusing thing is what it does is when it starts up all its containers, it kind of feeds all the logs together. So you can see them in this column over here. And actually, just for the sake of discussion, I forgot I didn't actually show you the Docker Compose. Oops. You can go away. Let's make this smaller. So what this is going to do is it will start X number of services. In this case, it's going to start Gitia, or I don't know, but which is
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's a Git like remote Git repository. So like if you're not using GitHub or you want to use something that's local to your network,
lightweight,
or in a container, it basically just is a Git server, for lack of a better term, even though that doesn't make a lot of sense. It requires a database, so there's also something called DB for database, and the environment is, basically these are the environment variables that are going to get passed into Gitia, and then the database is going to start up. It sets up the database password, all that stuff. This is super secure as usual. And then it does a volume mount, so you don't lose all your data. Sorry, there's also this volume mount here. And then you can give it more color on those volume mounts as well, if you want to, but in this case, we don't. So long story short, you kind of saw it already. The thing to remember, though, with Docker Compose, and this is true for all of the orchestration techniques, is you don't have any promises about what's going to come up first. So your tool chain needs to be tolerant of the fact that, Gitia, for example, may launch before the database is actually fully ready to receive it. So you need if you're writing the equivalent of Gitia, you've got to keep in mind that you have to, be aware that the database may not be there all the time. So you need to keep testing, and you can warn about it. We might even see a warning unless it came up correctly. I'm just looking. Yeah, it doesn't really look like it, but basically you need to keep testing. Otherwise it will fail. One of the labs I worked on for a long time, like we had to fix WordPress because in the initial version of the WordPress that we were using, it wouldn't retest if the database was there. So even though everything was perfectly fine, because WordPress happened to come up before the database came up, you would have this race condition where sometimes WordPress would fail because it wouldn't retest. So in a traditional server world, that's totally fine, and that's why it was never fixed, right? It's not really a bug per se. It's just that in a new environment, you sometimes have to think about the fact that it may not come up in the same way. All right, so going back to where we were, so I'm just going to do a popd back to my old directory, and if you see a pwd-p, it doesn't really show you, but it's mounted as an SSHFS. So for that reason is primarily what pushed me down this path, but also, if you've ever used Docker, most people like to use it as a regular user, even though what's happening underneath is it's actually running as root. So this is one of those things that is kind of a subtle distinction that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. So just, anything that you're doing in Docker, those containers are running as root. So keep that in mind. even if you don't use sudo. And at least when I first started using Docker, this is the way Docker was set up initially. And so, you know, I prefer not to use sudo there, because then I don't have this problem. Another way I could solve this problem is actually probably by passing the environment variables around correctly, and it might find it. I don't know. Like I said, I shouldn't play with it because I wanted to go and solve this problem too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that as a regular user, I can, if I'm in the appropriate Linux group, I can run Docker or Docker Compose, really, in this case. So going back to another playbook, so what I do is first make sure that the Docker group exists, which installing just Docker Compose does not seem to create it. I think installing the actual Docker runtime will create it, but I'm not sure because I haven't done it in a long time. Then I need to find out who I am so that I can put me in that group. And so I just add my user into the group. And then I need to go and change the permissions. Now, this is where it gets a little bit weird, because this one is the symlink, so it's owned by root, but if you notice, the permissions on it are full permissions, right? So you can basically, anybody can do anything to this symlink, essentially. Right. So what you need to modify is actually the the target of the symlink, which is the Podman socket. And this isn't going to work without sudo. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set the group on the ownership of this socket to being Docker by just doing G+X. You can do this with numbers. So I just did
lots
it this way.
Of comments coming in on chat right now about how.
Oh, really? Oh, sorry. I had that window.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Since Compose v3, there's a depends on option, says WSL Corsair. And then PS find mount path to dir will show you the mount type and mount options, so you don't have to, have your password hard coded in FS.
Oh, I'm actually using SSH keys, so I don't have to. Okay. I don't have that challenge with the SSHFS. So yeah, and I don't know if it was really necessary. It was just because I had my code editor on one machine and I wanted to run it on a different one, right? So
that's what code server is for.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I should be doing.
I'll be messing with that this weekend in my free time.
Do you have a link to that?
Code server? Yeah. Oh, hang on a second. It's, essentially the server version of VS Code.
I don't know if I've seen it that way. I've used the remote containers and the remote server stuff, and that's pretty cool.
Yes. This is actually like plug into this as kind of like CRW kind of thing, except it's nice. Browser based, right? Like the code server runs on a box, you expose the port, and all through the browser you can get to a VS Code like interface.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like a lot of these have a lot of problems with some of the newer iPad accessories, as I've filed bugs accordingly since I got a new iPad. So like scrolling is kind of weird on some of them, right? And then, there's just stuff that needs to get fixed. That's all.
Well, CRW,
Code Ready,
VS Code,
yeah,
this thing, they're all based on the same root. So what's really nice is they can, any patches you get for one of them should affect the rest as soon as they adopt them. Which all goes, I think do they all go back to Eclipse Che?
Or it's Thea? Is it Thea? It's the thing?
Yeah, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, but the nice thing is that they are doing the right thing in the open source world, right? Is they have, they're all kind of contributing to the same baseline and then kind of giving slightly different user experiences on them. Like, VS Code is very focused on, what I'm going to run on my desktop, and they do remoting using the remote terminal or the remote container plugin type stuff. It looks like this code server one uses more like the web-based, but still feels like VS Code. And then CRW uses the I'm going to run a fully remote development environment where even your terminals are actually running in a container on a remote server, for example. So I really like that you're seeing it's not competition, coopetition, I think they call it sometimes.
Exactly. Everybody's
where
helping each other, I feel like, at some point.
and different use cases have different needs. So I really like that a lot. Did we have which guys on the show, Rapscallion?
Did you just have these guys on the show? No, I don't think so.
Well, maybe we'll extend.
There is a good SSHFS extension for VS Code. Did you?
Oh, that's weird.
Nice. SSL and WSL extension for VS Code.
I learned actually as part of while I was fooling around with this, I learned AutoFS for the first time, which I had never used
good
before.
For you. I loathe AutoFS because it obfuscates a lot of stuff that I feel like admin should know, but that's just
interesting. One of the things that I immediately turned on, which surprised me that it was turned off by default, was what do they called it? Browse mode, I think was the flag, where instead of it just being like an empty directory until you go to something,
right?
It at least puts the stub there.
So Rapscallion Reeves totally just said exactly how I feel. AutoFS shouldn't be as hard as it is.
Yes. Why does it have two different configuration files? Like one that says, this is the directory I want to use, and then another one that says, this is what I want to put in that directory. Like, how about just one config file that says both? Like,
right?
So I had never really played with it before. But it fit my use case a lot better because because I spin up VMs all the time, and if I could just drop in the AutoFS stuff, then it will kind of eventually figure out how to get back to like my projects directory without me having to kind of set it up and making sure that the routing is right and like all that stuff. Like I don't have to reconnect it on boot. I don't have to have an FS tab and forget no fail, stuff like that. I'm not sure that's how I would set up a like regular machine, only like a disposable one, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at. I don't know. So off on that massive digression. So what I do is I set the permissions on the socket. Oh, sorry. The first thing I do is actually set the permissions on the directory that the socket is in, because there's no executable on it by default, or at least on my default install. And then I go and add the socket to the Docker group. And just to prove my mad or lack thereof Ansible skills, let me go up.
Add or lack thereof. Well, okay.
Yes. Well, I'm thinking to myself, this is a pretty simple set of Ansible playbooks, but I'm pretty proud of them. So I'm going to.
You should be proud of them. I think you have every right to be proud of your playbook.
I will say, all like my laptops, my servers, all that stuff are all Ansible-ified. So whenever I get a new laptop, I can just run a playbook. Well, I mean, I have to get the scripts there and Ansible installed, but then I can just run a playbook, and my laptop has all the things I like installed.
What ruined me from like doing that is when I stood up a Raspberry Pi cluster with Ansible. It's like now I have two sets of configurations for my network, and then
right.
Like I got really out of practice when I did that. Yeah.
Well, so I do have, like, I will say in my kind of Ansible playbook stuff that I use for the kind of the personal side of things. So like things that get a lot of customization, a lot of change, all that stuff. I will often kind of run a single role, just basically so I remember how to get it installed, so that I have like, I'll have a role for, I like this little app called How Do I, but I have to go and get it out of pip, and I have to build it, and then I have to install it. But I can't ever remember how to do that. So I encode that in a playbook, and then I just run that one role, so it's not So while I do have kind of the baseline on my laptop, the problem is that like my laptops are different if it's a Red Hat laptop versus a personal laptop, that kind of stuff. So those kinds of things are annoying. So what I'll kind of do is I kind of have like a baseline, but then I have a whole mess of roles that I use sometimes. And so then I just kind of have a YAML that says, I can literally call it one-off YAML that is just role 1, role 2, role 3, role 4, because I'm like, oh, I want this on this machine or that on that machine, and it makes it a lot easier. So sorry, did you have a question?
Rapscallion had a question about just command line reverse search. So Control R is the thing you're using. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So and the nice thing is, which a lot of people I don't think realize,
no, a lot of people don't.
You can Control R, but then if you Control R again, it will go back further. But then you can Control Shift R, and it'll go back forward again.
Oh, wow,
so you can do.
So you can do
I don't use it that
and
much.
Forward searches.
Yeah. So like, let me see if I've got something that.
Control Shift R did not do what I thought it would do.
LS. Okay. So I went. Okay. So if I do Control R and then I do LS, and then I do Control. Okay, and let's say that's the one I wanted. But then I do Control R again by accident or because I missed it or whatever. If you do Control Shift R, wait, maybe that's not it. There's a keystroke. I thought that's what it was. That will go back the other direction again.
Anyways,
it's handy. I've used it before.
Reverse search. Just look that up.
Yes.
Whatever your terminal of or not.
We've had a debate on here about
shell
fish versus bash as well.
ZSH, whatever. Like I'm using ZSH. Control R works. So it might be a different set of keystrokes to do what you're talking about in bash versus ZSH, but normally they're the same.
Yeah.
Normal.
I don't know of a shell that doesn't use Control R.
Same.
So yes, and JJ maybe says they do the playbook thing for things you can't remember. Yeah, exactly. Like I just shove it in a playbook and I call it a day. Yes, tangents are tangential even.
Yes.
All right, so my super proud. Oh my goodness, I can't talk.
Run this puppy. Just make it happen. Yeah.
If I can click the right buttons. So your mileage may vary on this. It is definitely not in that blog post. Probably not recommended to do things this way. But for me, because of how I learned to use Docker and Docker Compose, I expect to not type sudo in front of everything that I do. And that has actually translated really well to Podman, right? Which means that now most of the containers I run are not running rootful. But it is something to keep in mind that you are running these things rootful, even though you're not running sudo. Let's see. So now I ran that and I should be able to. What's funny is that sudo will still not work because of I think it's actually environment problems. Basically, it's not finding the symlinks or the SSHFS or something like that. But long story short, if I do Docker Compose without sudo, not that.
Now we're getting into.
And then let me just get. There's like a cleanup flag that I'd rather run if I can find it quickly. Because it's not there, whatever, it should work. Okay, so Docker Compose up, and now I'm happily on my merry way. What I think is particularly funny is just that if I run that command with sudo, it doesn't work, but if I run it without sudo, it will run as root. So let's do this. I know I can do more terminals in here, and this seems to be working out pretty well from a visibility and stuff perspective. Ooh, that's not what I expected to have happen.
Just to give you a time check here, it's 9:52.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, let me show you real quick the containers running. So as we established before, the containers are running as root. So if I do podman ps, you'll see that there's nothing there. And if we do sudo podman ps, and I pass my password. Then you can see that now I have my Postgres running here, and I have my Githia running here, all running inside Podman. I think, and actually there's some more exploratory stuff in the blog post, but one that I think is interesting, if you know anything, especially about how the networking stuff works. You can see it actually created a network for it, so they should be able to find each other. But so from an exposed perspective, you shouldn't be able to find the database, but you should be able to find the website. And I can show you the website, but maybe we'll talk about slides real quick, or talk about points real quick.
Yes. I'm do what you got to do.
Oh, and actually, because I can do the browser, so that'll be good.
Yeah. Thank you all for waiting as Langdon switches screen.
Yes, we need screen music.
So if you haven't heard, my intern started last week. One of his tasks is to find us some music that we can just kind of bring up and bring down as we see fit. I told him there's budget, there's whatever you want to do, just make sure that we never get flagged for it.
Right, exactly.
If you're not familiar with YouTube, it will literally flag you for stuff, like in the ISO case, for stuff that you own.
right. Yeah, didn't it happen? It happened to somebody really famously this like a week or two ago, but I can't think who it was.
I don't remember who it was.
But yeah, they got flagged up and like banned and all this stuff, and it was their own content. Like they had written the music.
Right.
Yeah, it was really super annoying.
Like somebody a while ago ran an algorithm that detected like every chord possible in music.
How? Right.
Like,
well, it's like
they used some like Kubeflow AI type thing.
It's that whole thing of there's no new plots, right, in books.
Right.
But in it's kind of the same with music, right? There's no actual new
there's only
chords
so many notes
or whatever. Right. Like it's just it's how you're putting them together.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just I was just preparing the other window so I could show you the Githia thing running. But all right,
someone got flagged as a copyright violation for playing Bach on the piano, and he took it as a compliment.
that is yes, I would too. Yes. Telling you're playing it right?
Yeah, exactly. That would be very validating for me for sure. Yeah. All right, points.
All right. So these sweet internet points. And I just realized I forgot to grab the links. Let me see if I have them somewhere.
I can't type all that.
That's a lot of typing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But Narendev in first place with 5,500 points. And then we have Netherlands Hackham with 5,200 points. Then Noah Friction with 4,000 points. And Joe Fuzz still holding at 2,300 points. Detective Conan Kudo, I noticed that they did not submit their points last time. They are still at 2,000 points. And so I was disappointed.
You can go back. And watch previous episodes and get the points from that.
And get the points for those. They live on for pretty much ever.
Points. Yeah.
And Bacon Fork with 1,800 points.
Bacon Fork is here today. Good to see you.
Yes. Where did my GitHub repo go? So I was just going to put the link to. I have so many windows open. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's one of those days.
So. Oh, I just realized I forgot I have a table of contents on the front page of the repo that I have to go like manually update, and I often forget that it exists. So it is currently stuck at like episode 24, and I think this is 35.
Yeah.
I know that's one of the big reasons I want to move to doing GitHub Pages with this thing, because it would automate it.
Yes.
But I don't know why I keep running into like brick wall to start. This is my problem with software development in general. A lot of the time is like, I know how to do the code part,
right?
But getting to the point where I can actually write code is sometimes a huge bear in and of itself. Yeah. Like, for example, I was fooling around with writing a Telegram bot, for example. I don't know if you use Telegram. Telegram is a chat client or chat server and client, which on the one hand is pretty cool because all the clients and stuff are open source. On the downside, the backend, the server is proprietary, I think, and run by a company out of Russia. So there's trade-offs, but it has a really good bot ecosystem, and
Amazing
it was like
bot ecosystem.
And so I wanted to write a stupid bot to clean up URLs so that if I grab a URL that I want to share like with my family, I could strip all the tracking information off of it. And so writing the code for that, I think it took me like 15 minutes to write the literally like 10 lines of Python it takes to do that. But to get the Telegram bot, what I couldn't even get out of like all the docs and everything else is like, where do I host it? Like, is it a web server? Is it something that Telegram sits on? Do I do it as like a GitHub Pages repo? Like it was just
GitHub Action. There's a way to do
I
that.
was like,
yeah,
that's the annoying thing is like, like OpenShift, like, but that was the whole thing. I didn't know, like, I couldn't find in the docs like how to make it go. And that's often the biggest challenge. So I will share the link to the bot once I finish the bot. But I got like 80% of the way there last night, and then was like, okay, I'm too fried staring at a computer. I need to stop now.
You need to discover the great tool that I've embraced from many, many years ago called Hugo, and just run with it. Yeah.
Well, so that it wasn't the problem of like, do I need a Node.js server? Do I need a Python server? Do I need a OpenShift? Do I need a whatever those things? It was like literally not knowing the kind of thing I needed. And eventually I figured out that I needed a web server that could respond to webhooks. And actually, the reason part of my impetus for doing it is I wanted to write a serverless function, and so so I had a serverless function that if you pass a URL to it, it will do the it'll do the cleanup, the shortening, or not shortening, but it'll actually expand it, then clean out the tracking information, and then give it back to you. And so I wrote that successfully as a serverless function, and that all worked great. But hooking that up to the Telegram bot, I was like, where is the code for the bot live? Yeah.
So,
and so
having run a bot in Telegram before, the code for the bot can live kind of anywhere. You just
so that's what eventually I figured out, is that I can actually make my serverless function itself the bot. And that's essentially the code that I have right now. Now I just need to hook up I need to tell the bot, or I need to tell, what is it called, bot father, which is how you create a Telegram bot,
like that.
I need to tell bot father the URL for my bot. And then obviously debug.
It's actually surprisingly simple once you figure out the model. It's
right, and that's why I think but that's almost like the worst when you're trying to come along to it from the outside, right? It's like, it's so obvious that nobody explains it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was the thing. But yeah, so when I hopefully I'll finish it soon, and I can share it around. But so that was the sweet internet points. We love giving them out. I also threw a link in the chat to the activity, so where to get other points for. Remember, you can watch old shows, and yes, I could use a URL lengthener, as Playing Risky says. I don't think that's actually a thing on the internet.
No,
maybe
actually it is. I found it last
really?
week. There's a thing called URL lengthener. I'll have to dig through my notes. I won't be able to find it during the show.
Why would I want a URL lengthener?
But it just makes your URL just super long.
Is this like the let me Google that for you kind of thing?
No,
like, no, just a joke?
It's like you plug in. Now you're gonna make me find it. All right, talk and make me find while I find it, and I will dig it up for you.
All right, I am looking just to see if there are any other questions.
Yeah, fire away with your questions, folks.
Oh, the messages in Telegram bots have to be less than 200 characters?
Not in Telegram. In YouTube chat is really the kind of like where we get hamstrung.
That's interesting.
Yeah, like it only it limits you to 200 characters. It's super annoying.
So does auto mount or Mount D replace AutoFS?
Maybe.
I think. Oh, okay. Maybe I have to go look at that because I was trying to find. This is one of those things with like Linux has now been around too long, as far as I'm concerned. Right? We need to delete all of the old content and restart the internet. Because it can be confusing about because things supersede each other, which they should, right?
And this is my pet peeve when it comes to like running newsletters, sharing blogs, and posts and tools with everybody, right? Like if you don't date your posts, I'm not going to share them because they're going to become outdated very quickly.
Well, and the thing that really annoys me about it is that HTTP has a mechanism for telling you the date that something was published, but all of the stupid generators like Hugo, for example, ignore it, and they use the date that it generated it, which is not the date that the content was written.
I don't think that's the case. You can override the date field in Hugo and say, no, it was actually generated on this date. Go to any of my websites.
Well, no, so it'll have the generated date. That's not when the content was written, though. And like traditionally, what it was supposed to be,
you can override it with a date flag.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So this annoys me about the internet because basically if you go to the last updated, I even stopped using the header, right? But it used to be like it used to be in Firefox, it was on the about this page kind of thing. It was like right there. But I think because it became so unusable, like so useless,
so hard to use,
not even there. But it used to be that like in the early days of the internet when people were doing blind HTML, it would literally be the date the thing was published. So even if it didn't have a date in the content, you knew what the date was because it was when it was published, and it was right there in the last updated, whatever you call it, header. Yeah. So I hate the internet.
Now you're gonna make me curl some things just to prove you wrong. But I dropped the URL lengthener in chat and in Zoom, so you can go check it out.
That's a sadly short URL though for something that specifies that it's a lengthener.
It's a lengthener, but you have to keep it short so you can get people to go to it, right?
To the lengthener, right, right. But so does it have a use case? Like what?
I mean, do we need use cases for code anymore?
That's true. That's true. That is,
so the use case is: are you tired of your URLs being just too darn short? No,
right. Okay.
No worry, no further. As aaa.abajilliona's.com has your back.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you want to be overly long URLs, you can totally do that. No idea why you would want to, but you can totally do it.
Well, I foresee an update to the this episode's show notes to remove to include, perhaps in addition to what's YouTube's. Let me just find my window here.
You know what's funny? I just did the curl to one of my web pages, and it gave me the date at the time of the curl.
Because so if it's got any sort of dynamic component, so it's one of those things where like the specification probably wasn't clear enough. Because technically speaking, it was updated right then because it included your name because you logged in, and so now the page is different because your name is on it, right? But that's not what I care about in the last update. What I care about is when was the material content changed, not when was the page generated, at least in most use cases.
So the date is at the very top.
So for this URL, this is the URL on YouTube for this show that I just threw in the chat. Clearly that is far too short because it uses the u2.be.
Yes.
And so what I should do is change that to include the lengthened one for this week's show notes, I think is the takeaway.
Yes, because
playing risky, exactly. Like date published, date updated would be lovely, but that is not, at least not any standard HTTP.
Like we need like a blog RFC, right? Like
right.
All blogs must have, and it could just be one page. All blogs must have an RSS feed, a date that is accurate on all articles, and like that could be it.
The other thing that annoys me too, and that's kind of related, right? And like Red Hat Enterprise Linux is better about this, but Fedora definitely have this problem where the docs for the operating system itself, right, are, they're on the internet. And they are in a page that, on the left nav is, the content of, Fedora 14. But then kind of if you go up the nav, the later and older versions of Fedora are also there. And in the URL bar is the version number. So if you change the version number, like I wanted to do something intelligent. Like, so instead of just saying 404, if the AutoFS page is now gone, redirect me to something useful, like that's in that category. And I think the RHEL does this one pretty well. But like, or allow me to be more specific in my searching and say, or the warning, right? This was one of the things that I got changed actually in the customer portal, because I kept complaining about it. Maybe other people complain too, but I take responsibility, which is now on any piece of doc that is not the most current version of something, it says, hey, what you're looking at isn't the most current. Are you sure you're looking in the right place? Right. Which is handy, because otherwise, you make stupid mistakes pretty regularly.
Anyway,
but on that note, that was our little introduction to using Docker Compose Podman.
And our many tangents.
And our many tangents. You can check out those Ansible playbooks. Feel free to use them.
Feel free to make them better.
Feel free to make them better.
No offense.
They are pretty straightforward. But play around with any of the other Compose components there. One of the things that I started fooling around with there, which is checked into the repo, is doing the cool store using Docker Compose. I ran into some problems. Basically, I got the whole thing running.
Yeah.
But there's some environment variable I'm not setting correctly so that like the front end can find the back end. So I know the back end is running, and I know the back end works because each of those, the nice thing about using like a demo app for stuff like this is that each of the components actually has its own little web page that says, I'm here, and so I verified that those all work. But my conversion from the Kubernetes YAML to Docker Compose, like I missed something that I couldn't quite figure out. And I was going to talk about that on the show today, but we're already at 8 minutes after. Yes. So I figure we should pause here.
Plain risky. Reach out to Langdon or myself to help you with your order by Sunday problem.
What is order by Sunday?
Yeah, wasn't plain risky part of
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yes, shoot me a note. And hit me on Twitter if you don't know my email address.
Just
my email address
is
at
Red Hat.
Very easy to guess based on my first name at Red Hat. So
my last name at Red Hat. That works out well.
Right. But let's call it a show.
Yeah, let's call it a show. It was great. So coming up at 11 a.m. Eastern, 1500 UTC, Ask an OpenShift admin, we will be talking about the joys of subscription comparisons, licensing, entitlements, the whole 9 yards, right? We're going to dive into all that fun stuff for you so you can figure out the right scenario for your organization. So please feel free to join us. It is an office hour. That's the OpenShift admin office hour.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that part.
Yeah, sorry. I might not have said it. It's entirely possible at this point, given the way that
in about an hour.
Yeah, so in less than an hour, it'll be on, and Andrew and I will be there with some friends, having some guests on as well to talk about it. And feel free to bring your OpenShift questions, as it is an office hour. So you can totally bring your hey, I've got a problem with OpenShift XYZ, and we will try to help you out. So definitely tune into that. And as always, if you would like to subscribe to the OpenShift streaming calendar, I just dropped a link in chat. We'd really appreciate that if you just added that to your calendar or pulled the ICS file into your calendar, and you would just have our shows available to you at disposal at any time.
And if you hit that like button on Twitch or on the YouTube, it will actually notify you.
Like and
Twitch notifications, I think,
always
are not that annoying, personally.
No, they're not. It's really just like, hey, by the way, this thing's online right now, and we typically put 90 seconds of starting soon on. So by the time you hit the notification and go to it, you'll be in a good place. So we have a question. Is it a good idea to manage Ansible for running Docker Compose using its module called Docker Compose? My use case is more on the lines of running few test cases which rely on Docker Compose. So I believe there's a dependency in the Ansible module of Docker Compose being on that system. So just make sure you satisfy all the dependencies, and it should work for your use case.
The only challenge I've had with community modules for Ansible is any what you would exactly expect with community modules, which is just making sure they're available and compatible with whatever the target is, and so that can be a little bit of a pain. So just make sure, so not only do you have a dependency requirement on Docker Compose, but it needs to make sure it's using the correct version of Python, stupid stuff like that. So just that's been my biggest challenge with community modules. Like, nothing against them, just kind of be aware of that. I have not used
let me go pull up the module page, see if it's community or not.
One of the things, this is one of those places where it's kind of like, which side do you err on? I don't use Ansible with containers, sort of. So in other words, like, there's kind of like, you have kind of the machine that you're managing, which might use, let's say it uses a bunch of containers on it. How do you get those containers there? Well, there's a bunch of different ways. You can use something like a config management tool like Ansible to get those containers there and running and keep them, upright. That's one option. One of the things that we talk about on this show, and I kind of tend to believe, is that an orchestration engine is actually the right answer for getting those containers running and keeping them running.
That's, but if you're using it in CI, that's a different story. Right?
So, but if you're using it to build the container images, that's a different use case. And Ansible, I think, is often more appropriate there than it is using it kind of at runtime. So like using the Docker Compose module for Ansible is more, or at least I think this is what it's for. I can't quite remember, but I believe it's more like the orchestration side of things. And so, like, I don't know. So it's a really it's a really fuzzy space right now. Like, there's a lot of overlapping tool chains that can do different aspects of build, CI, CD, orchestration, and they all do some of those things very, very well, and others okay. So like, if you know Ansible really, really well, it can be a really good way to manage your entire environment, including your orchestration. However, it may not be the best tool for the job for the orchestration. So I wouldn't go learn Ansible to do the orchestration, if that makes sense.
Yes. I wasn't listening. Sorry. Someone sent me a message that seemed important, so I responded.
I hear you. I hear you.
But anyways, I do appreciate
it. That is a super difficult topic.
So Schwala35 says, yes, my use case is for CI. So
yeah,
there you go.
So it can definitely be super useful for that kind of environment. Basically, kind of just, you want to automate the stand up of your environment for some testing and the teardown, in a relatively straightforward, simple way. And Ansible well, that can be a really good solution for that. It's just, like I said, that is a super custom answer for most people. Like, it's not even something I would necessarily kind of cover on the show, except to say, like, we could have 10 episodes interviewing 10 different people who will all have different valid answers to that question.
Right. They're all valid.
Right.
It's just like an OS, right? Like, there's 1,001 ways to do something. Whichever way that works best for you is the one you should go with. Right.
SHFS versus AutoFS versus NFSF tab, FS tab, or maybe Mount D. So yeah,
whatever you gotta use it. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate all your time and comments and everything, and thank you for joining us. We'll be back here in less than an hour with myself, Andrew, and some guests. And until then, stay safe out there. And if you don't see us later today, have a good weekend, whatever it is. We are off
I think
the air on Friday, by the way, folks.
yes, and Monday probably
and
as
Monday,
well.
as it is a holiday here in the US. Yes.
And then but next, I think it's next week, we're doing the Container Health Index.
Yes.
So join us for that show.
That'll be awesome.
It should be really interesting because I'm curious about it myself.
Mhm.
But I might be lying. Oh, yes, I am lying. Yes.
Oh,
Next Wednesday, we're going to talk about subordinate user IDs.
Cool.
And then we're going to talk about the health index the following week.
Got it. All right.
So
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Take it easy. See you soon.